There's never a dull moment in the Middle East, is there? But for a change, this photo speaks of some inspiration, of the Arab youth of Egypt, of Cairo, coming out in their masses to voice their concern for democracy, for expression, for freedom. Nevertheless, at the same time, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict seems to be stuck. So we're at a dilemma. And in my work, where I try for the last 17 years to understand how to move the peace process, how to make peace between Israelis, Palestinians, Jordanians, Egyptians. So I attended a meeting in London where a group of Arabists, including one of the activists that were here in Tahrir Square, in the Arab Spring that this set of events has come to be called. And I was really inspired to hear how this gentleman was able to stand up to the fear of the police state that the Mubarak regime represented. After his talk, I came up to him and I introduced myself as an Israeli, and I told him that I and thousands of other Israelis were inspired by him and by his people. And I asked him, how can we use the momentum of this Arab Spring to help advance the Israel-Palestine, the Israeli-Arab peace? I asked him, would he help me to speak in Tahrir Square with Jordanian, Palestinian colleagues of mine? Could he come to Rabin Square in Tel Aviv and speak and share to the Israeli public how he overcame that fear and brought down the Mubarak regime? Sadly, he responded, no, that's not possible. I was disappointed, but in reality, I wasn't surprised. Because in the 17 years of my work, of trying to bring peace between Arabs and Israelis, I've come across that fear, that same fear every day. It's the fear of the small but vocal minority on both sides that want to stop peace, that call and sometimes use violent means to condemn people that seek to promote the peace. In my work, I've been focusing on water, together with Jordanian, Palestinian, and other Israeli colleagues. For the last 17 years, we've been focusing on the shared water resources on the Jordan River Valley, from the Sea of Galilee, the Jordan River, down to the Dead Sea, on the shared waters of the mountain aquifer shared by Israel and the West Bank, on the shared waters of the coastal aquifer shared by Israel and Gaza, and have tried to use the interdependent nature of those shared water resources to build trust, to overcome that fear that I so quickly and easily recognized from the Egyptian colleague. I've tried to focus on the demise of our ecosystems because of the conflict. This is the Jordan River coming to a complete stop just 2 kilometers south of the Sea of Galilee. This is a dam built on the Yarmouk that prevents the waters of the Yarmouk flowing into the Jordan River. In the midst of conflict, every side successfully captures those waters and tries to keep it to itself. So as a result, this is the Jordan River today. It's hard to see the Jordan River. There is not a child on earth that hasn't grown up with the imagination of the Jordan River. I don't think anybody recognizes that this could be the Jordan River today. But in fact it is, and it's because of the conflict. So we've brought tens of thousands of Israelis, of Palestinians, of Jordanians to see what's happened to our shared waters. Not only is there so little water, in fact, 98% of the historical flow of the Jordan is no longer there, is taken away. And instead, it's sewage, it's agricultural runoff, it's saline waters that's left in a river that's holy to half of humanity, Jews, Christians, and Muslims. It's not only the Jordan River that's impacted. Its terminal lake, the Dead Sea, is shrinking. It's lost a third of its surface area. The lowest place on earth is getting lower every year. In fact, by a meter in depth every year. Piers that were once in water are today 25 meters up in thin air. Other piers that were on the shoreline of the Dead Sea are today over 1 kilometer away from the waters of the Dead Sea. But it's not only the environmental response that we try to focus on. It's also the impact of the conflict on water supply in the domestic sector, on the water sharing agreements, particularly between Israelis and Palestinians in this interim, so-called interim period of the Oslo Accords that was supposed to last only 5 years, but 17 years later are still in force. Accords that have left domination to be the name of the game, have allowed Israel to extract 80% of the shared waters of the mountain aquifer and only provide 20% to the Palestinians. Clearly not fair and clearly not the intention. And we bring Israelis to see the result. When an Israeli turns on the tap, we can always expect water. When a Palestinian turns on the tap, there's uncertainty. It depends. Every home must have a tank on their roof because in the winter, once a week, water will be provided by the municipality. In the summer, perhaps once every 3 weeks. And only as much water that can be stored in the tanks is the quantity of water that can be consumed. So showering every day is certainly out of the question. It's not only the occupation, it's also mismanagement, but the perception is very much the occupation, and it's the perception that counts. It's not only water supply, it's also contamination of shared groundwater. So that when you're not getting your fair share of water, perhaps the priority is not to deal with your sewage, particularly if the West Bank is high country and Israel is low country, and the sewage will flow to Israel anyway. The fact that the shared waters of both peoples are polluted doesn't speak so loud when you get so little of that water. In fact, we're shooting both peoples in the foot, by not altering the current agreement. And hence, we've gone forward and proposed what a model water accord could look like and called on our governments to stop holding water as a hostage to the failure of the peace process to move forward, to increase water supply to every Palestinian home so that every Palestinian can feel the results of peace. We've suggested models that are familiar to so many because in any shared basin, there needs to be a commission that manages shared waters, but in partnership. Experience here in North America, experience of great rivers in Europe. We don't need to recreate the wheel. The experience is there. We just need the political leadership to get us there. But it's not enough to focus on theory. That doesn't capture the hearts and minds of people and convince them to overcome the fear of those that don't want peace. And they're there. They're there on both sides, vocal, violent. So we've developed a program that partners communities, Jordanian, Palestinian, Israeli. 17 communities along the Jordan Valley, Dead Sea. 13 communities on top of the mountain aquifer. 2 communities on the coastal aquifer, including in Gaza today. A Gazan community and Israeli community are working together. Each pair of these communities share a common water source. They can see the water that flows either between them or across them, or springs that are in between. We work in the schools of these communities, working through a common textbook. In fact, the only textbook that exists that's the same textbook in Arabic and in Hebrew, teaching about our shared water resources and how what I do impacts my water resources, but also impacts my neighbor. And what my neighbor does impacts my water resources as well. And therefore creates a sense, an understanding of interdependence, an understanding of cooperation over water is not a privilege, it's a necessity. In fact, the school kids do much more than that. They build rainwater harvesting facilities, grey water reuse. They literally improve their water reality and therefore help convince others to overcome the fear. We work with mayors, and proudly today, every pair of mayors have signed a memorandum of cooperation. Again, not because they're best friends, because they've come to understand that they must work together if they're truly going to benefit their communities, if they're going to solve the water and sanitation problems that they suffer from. The mosquitoes are nasty. The water contamination smells. And the lack of water stings. And therefore, these mayors are working together, have stood up. They've been condemned, but they've been able to defend their actions by simply saying, this is to the benefit of my community, you, fellow residents. So when a resident stands up and condemns in a public meeting, and we've experienced that, the only resident that leaves is the one that condemns, and all the others stay because they can see the logic, they can understand the sense. These are the mayors of the Jordan River with their big bellies out there. Israeli, Palestinian, Jordanian. They're jumping into the clean part of the River Jordan. The sewerage is about 2 kilometers south of this point where the fresh water stops. They're jumping into the river together in front of CNN, the BBC, Israeli, Palestinian, Jordanian television, because they can stand proud. They understand that they're all residents of the Jordan Valley, that the actions to remove the water and replace it with sewerage has been at their expense. These municipalities, these residents have lost out from the conflict, and therefore they stand together. In fact, there's no end to where we can go once we overcome fear and build trust. This is David Cameron, the current Prime Minister. But here, he was the leader of the opposition of the UK. And he planted a tree with the Israeli head of a community called Sur Hadassah and the Palestinian head of a village called Wadi Fukin. This community stopped the wall, stopped the separation barrier from being built. The trust was originally built over water. They went way beyond water. And this is the only example where an Israeli and Palestinian community managed to stop the wall. So, what can we learn from the Arab Spring? How can we benefit from the momentum of the Arab youth to help move forward Israeli-Palestinian peace? Well, I think the card says it all. The game is over, and that is the game of putting all of our investments in prime ministers, presidents, and not trying to work with the people. What we've seen, what the international community has tried to achieve is this handshake. In this case, Sadat of Egypt and Begin of Israel. But there's been a problem, a legitimacy problem. Sadly, most of the Arab leaders have been dictators, have been corrupt, have been brutal. Sadly, many of the Israeli prime ministers have been dishonest and not really wanted to end the occupation, or have been morally corrupt in continuing settlement building in the midst of negotiation. Not only does this lead to the loss of faith of the public, but because we're trying to get the handshake, the international community is investing billions of dollars. Hundreds of billions of dollars have been invested in the Arab-Israeli conflict towards our leaders. That's only strengthened their hand. It hasn't helped them. And when the leader falls, such as Mubarak, then the handshake is actually shaking because we have no certainty that the peace treaty between Egypt and Israel will indeed continue because there is no foundation for peace. So the solution, the lesson must be not just to invest in our leaders, but to invest in the real peacemakers, those brave people that have stood up against the fear. So I close by inviting my Arab colleagues to come and speak in Rabin Square in Tel Aviv. And I hope that I and my Palestinian and Jordanian colleagues will get to speak in Tahrir Square so that we can see the peace that we so desperately need. Thank you very much.